Cop plants drugs on innocent man. What happens next will shock you. Imagine this. You're on your way home after a long day. The world outside is quiet, the rain adding rhythm to your thoughts. But then, out of nowhere, your rearview mirror lights up with flashing red and blue. A sharp siren wails, cutting through the rain and your thoughts. Your heart skips a beat as panic begins to creep in. You slow down, pull over, and grip the steering wheel tightly, knuckles turning white. But what if it's not just a routine stop? What if in the next few minutes, your entire life is turned upside down, not because of what you did, but because of what someone else chooses to do? This is the story of James, a hard-working man with simple dreams, whose life takes an unimaginable turn on an ordinary night. He's about to discover what happens when the trust we place in those sworn to protect us is broken, and the consequences will leave you questioning everything. Stay with me. You'll want to hear every chilling detail. Flashing red and blue lights fill his rearview mirror. James pulls over to the side of the road, his fingers tightening around the steering wheel as nervous energy takes over. The rain seems louder now, drumming on the car roof like an ominous countdown. A shadowy figure approaches, Officer Bradley. A knock on the window startles James. He fumbles to lower it, his breathing shallow and rapid. "License and registration, please," the officer demands, his tone firm and without emotion. James, struggling to maintain composure, replies, "Sure, officer, is there a problem?" The officer's flashlight beams directly into James's eyes, forcing him to squint. The harsh light moves methodically across the car's interior, pausing momentarily on a fast food bag in the passenger seat. James can feel the judgment in the silence that follows. "Your taillight's out," Bradley announces abruptly. His voice is cold and authoritative. "Step out of the vehicle." James hesitates, his mind racing. A taillight? He hadn't noticed anything wrong. Before he can fully process the situation, he stammers, "But I didn't know my taillight." Bradley interrupts sharply, his voice louder now, more commanding. "Step out of the vehicle! Now!" James exhales shakily, nodding as he reaches for the door handle. The rain greets him instantly, soaking through his clothes as he steps out onto the wet pavement. His shoes splash in a small puddle, adding to the discomfort. He glances at the officer, hoping for some kind of explanation, but Bradley's expression remains stoic, almost predatory. "Stand over there," the officer barks, motioning toward the side of the road. James complies, his shoulders hunched against the rain, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and fear. He watches helplessly as the officer begins to search his car. At first, it seems routine, checking compartments, glancing under the seats. But then, something feels off. Bradley's movements become deliberate, calculated, as if he's looking for something specific. James notices the officer's hand lingering a moment too long in the glove compartment. A wave of dread washes over him as Bradley suddenly pulls out a small plastic bag. Well, Bradley says, his tone dripping with false satisfaction. "What do we have here?" James's stomach drops. His voice falters as he stutters. "That's not mine. I swear I've never seen that before." But Bradley's expression is one of certainty, not doubt. He looks James straight in the eye and replies coldly, "Tell it to the judge." James's world begins to spin. The rain, the flashing lights, the cold pavement beneath his feet. It all fades into the background as the reality of the situation crashes over him. His life, his future, everything he's worked so hard for is suddenly at stake. And for what? Something he didn't do. The rain doesn't let up, but neither does Officer Bradley. For James, this is only the beginning of a nightmare he never saw coming. The sound of a heavy door shutting echoes in James's ears as he finds himself in a cold, sterile interrogation room. The walls seem to close in on him, painted in drab gray, the air thick with tension. James sits at a metal table, his head buried in his hands, his mind racing. The faint buzz of a fluorescent light above only adds to his growing anxiety. He can still hear the rain pounding outside, but it feels distant now, almost surreal. Suddenly, the door creaks open. Footsteps echo across the floor as two detectives enter. Their presence commands authority. Detective Miller, the older of the two, has a steely gaze and an air of skepticism. Detective Ross, younger but no less intimidating, carries a stack of files under his arm. Miller doesn't waste any time. His voice is calm but carries an undertone of suspicion. "You've got a clean record, kid. So why start running drugs now?" James looks up, his eyes wide with desperation. He shakes his head fervently. "I didn't. That officer planted it. You have to believe me," he pleads, his voice cracking under the weight of his words. Miller raises an eyebrow, leaning back in his chair. He doesn't respond immediately, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably. Ross, standing by the wall, folds his arms and finally speaks, his tone sharp and probing. "That's a serious accusation, son. Do you have any proof?" James grips the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. His voice rises, edged with frustration and panic. "Check his body cam. He turned it off before the search." The room falls silent again. Miller and Ross exchange glances, their expressions unreadable. The weight of doubt presses heavily on James. Meanwhile, miles away in a modest living room, Emily sits on her couch, her laptop open in front of her. The room is dim, lit only by the glow of the screen. Her hands tremble as she rewinds the footage she captured earlier that evening. On the screen, the events play out. The flashing lights, the officer's movements, and the critical moment when something isn't right. Her heart races as she realizes what she has just uncovered. "This isn't right," she whispers to herself, her voice trembling. "I need to do something." She bites her lip, her mind torn between fear and a growing sense of responsibility. She knows what she's holding in her hands, a potential lifeline for James, and the truth that could expose a dangerous lie. Earlier that evening, Emily sat in her small apartment, replaying the events of the day in her mind. Something about Officer Bradley's demeanor had bothered her. His tone, his movements, the way he handled the situation. Her instincts told her something wasn't right. Emily grabbed her camera, which she had left running on her dashboard during the stop. She often filmed her drives for her small travel vlog, never thinking it might capture something more significant. As she rewound the footage, her breath caught in her throat. There it was, Officer Bradley's hand slipping into the glove compartment, the subtle but unmistakable act of planting the small plastic bag. The audio picked up James's protests, his confusion, and the officer's abrupt commands. Emily's hands trembled as she paused the video, staring at the frozen frame. She knew what she had. Proof. Proof that James was telling the truth. She sat back, weighing her options. Do I share this? What if it puts me in danger? But then, she thought of James, a man who had done nothing wrong, now facing life-shattering consequences because of corruption. With resolve, she transferred the footage to her laptop, edited out the unnecessary parts, and wrote a caption that would grab attention. "Corrupt cop plants drugs on an innocent man. Share if you care." She hesitated for a moment, her cursor hovering over the post button. Taking a deep breath, she clicked it. The video uploaded quickly, and within minutes, her notifications started flooding in. Comments, likes, and shares began pouring through her screen like a tidal wave. "This is insane. Corruption has no place in our justice system. Shared. We need justice for this man." As the hours passed, the video began spreading far beyond her network. Hashtags like "Justice for James," "Corrupt Cops," and "Stand for Truth" exploded across platforms. News outlets noticed the traction, and soon, the footage was aired on primetime television, accompanied by commentary from legal experts and activists. Emily watched in awe as her video sparked outrage across the nation. Social media users recorded their own reactions, calling for investigations and accountability. Protesters took to the streets, chanting James's name and demanding change. What began as a gut feeling in a young woman's apartment had turned into a full-scale movement. Emily felt a mix of relief and determination. She knew this was just the beginning, but for the first time, she felt like the truth had a fighting chance. At the police station, the air is thick with tension. Phones ring incessantly. Reporters' voices echo from televisions in the background, and officers exchange uneasy glances. The viral video has thrown the entire precinct into chaos. Chief Anderson storms into the main hall, his usual calm and authoritative demeanor replaced with visible anger. His face is stern, his sharp eyes scanning the room as he clutches his phone tightly. The video paused on the damning moment where Officer Bradley plants the drugs. His voice booms, cutting through the murmur of uneasy conversations. "Bradley, my office, now!" The room falls silent. Officers freeze mid-task, their eyes darting toward Bradley. For a moment, the once confident officer is caught off guard, his usually smug expression melting into one of panic. "Chief, what's this about?" Bradley tries to maintain his composure, his voice laced with forced calmness. "You know exactly what this is about," the chief growls, pointing at his phone. Bradley hesitates, then follows the chief into his office. The door slams shut behind them, the sound reverberating through the precinct, like a gavel hitting a bench. Inside the office, Chief Anderson throws his phone onto the desk, the screen still lit up with the viral video. "You want to explain this to me?" he demands, his voice low but seething with fury. Bradley picks up the phone with trembling hands, his face pale as he watches the video. His mind races for an excuse, but the evidence is undeniable. The video clearly shows his every move, the truth now exposed to millions. "Sir, it's not what it looks like," Bradley stammers, his usual confidence crumbling under the weight of the chief's glare. "Not what it looks like?" Anderson repeats mockingly. "It looks like you planted drugs on an innocent man, turned off your body cam, and brought disgrace to this department. So tell me, Officer Bradley, how is this not what it looks like?" Bradley shifts uncomfortably, his mind grasping at straws. "Maybe the video was edited," he tries weakly, but even he doesn't believe his own words. The chief slams his fist on the desk, startling Bradley. "Enough," Anderson barks. "This video has gone viral. The public is calling for answers, and our reputation is on the line. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Bradley opens his mouth to respond, but the chief cuts him off. "I want your badge and gun on my desk. Effective immediately, you're suspended. And believe me, there will be a full investigation into this. If you think you can get away with this, think again." Bradley reluctantly removes his badge and gun, placing them on the desk with trembling hands. He avoids the chief's piercing gaze, his mind now consumed with fear over what's to come. As Bradley exits the office, the tension in the precinct is palpable. His fellow officers avoid eye contact, their silence a stark contrast to the uproar on social media and in the streets. Chief Anderson takes a deep breath, his gaze falling to the phone on his desk. He knows this is only the beginning of a storm that will test the integrity of the entire department. The courtroom is a tense and electric scene, filled with reporters, spectators, and a palpable sense of anticipation. Every seat in the room is occupied, with many standing along the walls. The sound of hushed murmurs echoes as the trial begins. James sits at the defense table, his posture stiff, eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. Beside him, his lawyer, Mr. Carter, radiates calm confidence. Across the room, Officer Bradley fidgets in the witness stand, his once arrogant demeanor replaced with visible unease. The judge calls for order, and Mr. Carter rises to his feet, adjusting his glasses before addressing Bradley. His voice is sharp, calculated, and carries an edge that commands attention. "Officer Bradley," Carter begins, his tone steady, "did you follow proper protocol during your search of my client's vehicle?" Bradley leans toward the microphone, attempting to project confidence. "Of course," he replies. Carter nods, pacing slightly, his hands clasped behind his back. "Proper protocol," he repeats, as though testing the weight of the words. He stops abruptly and faces Bradley. "Then perhaps you can help us understand what's shown in this footage." With a deliberate motion, Carter signals to the courtroom technician, who plays the now infamous video on a large screen. The courtroom falls silent as the footage rolls, showing Bradley planting the bag of drugs in James's car. A collective gasp ripples through the room. Spectators exchange shocked glances, reporters scribble furiously in their notepads, and cameras flash in quick succession. Bradley's face flushes, and beads of sweat form on his brow. He shifts in his seat, gripping the armrests tightly. I don't recall that moment," he stammers, his voice faltering. Carter doesn't miss a beat. He steps closer to the stand, his voice growing sharper. "You don't recall, Officer Bradley? Or are you conveniently forgetting because the evidence is undeniable?" The judge raises an eyebrow, leaning forward slightly. The tension in the room is suffocating as all eyes remain on Bradley. Bradley looks around, his gaze darting toward the exit as though wishing he could vanish. I'm not sure how—" Carter cuts him off, his voice booming. "Your Honor, this video speaks louder than any testimony Officer Bradley could give. It clearly shows him planting evidence in my client's vehicle. This is not just misconduct. It is a betrayal of the badge he wears." The judge looks toward the screen, then back at Bradley, her expression grave. "Officer Bradley," the judge begins, her voice stern, "do you have any credible explanation for what is shown in this footage?" Bradley opens his mouth but says nothing, his silence more damning than any admission. The courtroom buzzes with whispers again, the weight of the evidence undeniable. Mr. Carter turns to the judge, his voice calm but firm. "Your Honor, my client, James, is innocent. He has endured public humiliation and legal jeopardy because of Officer Bradley's actions. I respectfully request that all charges against him be dismissed immediately." The judge nods solemnly, her decision clear. The sound of the judge's gavel echoes through the courtroom, silencing the crowd. The judge's voice is measured and commanding. "All charges against James are hereby dismissed. Furthermore, Officer Bradley will face a formal investigation for misconduct and corruption." A wave of relief washes over James. He exhales deeply, his hands trembling as he clasps them together in gratitude. He turns to Mr. Carter, who offers him a reassuring nod. From the back of the courtroom, Emily watches the scene unfold, a soft smile playing on her lips. She had taken a stand for what was right, and the outcome was more than she could have hoped for. As James rises to his feet, he looks toward Emily, their eyes meeting for a brief moment. He mouths the words, "Thank you," and Emily nods, her expression resolute. The reporters outside the courtroom clamor for interviews, their voices blending into a chaotic symphony of justice being served. James to reporters. "I'm grateful for everyone who stood by me. This experience showed me that standing up for what's right can change everything."
Justice prevailed, but not just because of the system. It was the courage of one person, someone who refused to stay silent, that made all the difference. In a world where trust can be broken, it's people like Emily who remind us of the power of doing what's right. One act of courage can ripple out and change lives. Would you have the bravery to step in? If this story moved you, share it. Together, we can hold those in power accountable.